Rose was born in a place where hope was often stifled by poverty. Her family lived in a small mud house, surviving on her mother's subsistence farming and her father's occasional odd jobs. Growing up, Rose watched her parents toil endlessly without much to show for it, and her heart ached. She resolved at a young age to rewrite the narrative of her family. "I will make things better for us," she often whispered to herself. Rose was not only stunningly beautiful, but also remarkably intelligent. Her beauty was the kind that turned heads, and her intelligence the kind that inspired admiration. Yet she refused to be defined by her looks. "Beauty is fleeting," her mother often told her, "but what you put in your head, no one can take away." At school, Rose was a star. She excelled in every subject, earning the respect of her teachers and peers. But life on campus was not without its challenges. Being both brilliant and beautiful, Rose attracted attention from all corners. Campus big boys flaunted their wealth, trying to win her over with gifts, promises, and charm. Rose, just one dinner, a persistent admirer named Amika pleaded one afternoon after class. "I could take care of you. You wouldn't have to stress about anything." She smiled politely. "Thank you, Amika, but I'm not interested. I have my goals, and distractions aren't part of them." Rose stayed true to her word. She joined a study group and spent countless hours in the library, poring over textbooks, solving equations, and practicing presentations. Her dedication was unwavering, and it paid off. At graduation, Rose stood on the podium as the valedictorian, her first-class degree in business administration, a testament to her hard work and determination. Her family, who had never even dreamed of attending such an event, watched with pride and tears in their eyes. Her father's voice trembled as he said, "You've done what no one in this family ever thought possible. We are so proud of you, Rose." But life after graduation was not as rosy as she had imagined. With her impressive results, Rose believed she would quickly secure a job and begin lifting her family out of poverty. She sent out dozens of applications, attended interviews, and waited eagerly for callbacks. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The rejection emails piled up, and the silence from some companies was deafening. When she finally got invited to interviews, the conversations often took a dark turn. "Miss Rose," one interviewer said with a sly smile, "you're undoubtedly qualified. But tell me, how badly do you want this job?" His eyes roamed over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "What do you mean, sir?" Rose asked cautiously. He leaned forward. "Sometimes, to secure opportunities, one must be flexible. If you're willing to spend some time with me after hours, I'm sure I can push your application to the top of the pile." Rose's stomach churned. She stood up abruptly. "I'll have to decline, sir. My qualifications speak for themselves, and if that's not enough, then this isn't the place for me." Time and again, similar scenarios played out. Rose discovered that many of her less qualified peers had secured jobs by succumbing to such advances. Her frustration grew. One evening, sitting on the veranda of their modest home, her younger brother Chidi asked, "Sister, why haven't you started working yet? I thought you said you'd get a big job and take us all to the city." Her mother quickly intervened. "Chidi, don't ask such questions. Your sister is trying her best." Rose forced a smile, but couldn't stop the tears that welled up. "I'll figure it out, Mama. I just need some time." One day, after another failed job interview, Rose sat outside the company building, her head in her hands, crying. She wasn't sure how to face her family again and explained that once more she hadn't secured a job. The weight of the disappointment felt unbearable. She thought of her parents' faces, proud of her achievements, yet unaware of the painful truth she was hiding. Just as she was about to compose herself and leave, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Is that you, Rose?" The voice sounded familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. She looked up, trying to wipe the tears from her eyes, and saw a woman approaching her. At first, Rose didn't recognize her. The woman was dressed in an elegant designer outfit, her long, sleek hair cascading down her back. She wore expensive jewelry, and as she came closer, Rose could see she was driving a very luxurious, sleek car parked just by the curb. The woman stopped in front of Rose and smiled warmly. "It's me, Ruth," she said, her eyes twinkling with recognition. "Ruth from your study group in school." Rose blinked in surprise. Ruth, the same Ruth who had sat next to her in study sessions. the one with the messy hair and the modest clothes. This woman looked nothing like the Ruth she remembered. "Ruth?" Rose stammered, her voice almost a whisper. "Is it really you?" Ruth laughed, her smile still radiant. "Yes, it's me. I know. I've changed a lot." She took a step closer and sat beside Rose, noticing the tears still in her eyes. "You look like you've had a rough time. What's going on?" Rose hesitated, unsure whether she should open up. She wiped her eyes and looked at Ruth. "I've been applying to jobs for months now, but every time they either tell me I'm overqualified or they want something else from me." She felt a lump form in her throat. "It's so frustrating. I don't know what to do anymore." Ruth's expression softened. "I know exactly how that feels," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I was in your shoes not long ago, and it was one of the hardest times in my life. But Rose, I found a way out. It's not easy, but if you're willing to take a different path, you might find something better than you've ever imagined." Rose looked at Ruth with skepticism. "But I've been doing everything right. I studied hard, stayed focused, avoided distractions. Why is this happening to me?" Ruth nodded in understanding. "I get it. I was the same way. I followed all the rules, stayed focused on my studies, and got great grades. But when it came to getting a job, I realized that the world isn't always fair. I know you've heard it before, but sometimes it's not just about what you know. It's about who you know and what you're willing to do." Ruth handed Rose a sleek business card. "Reach out to me anytime. We can talk more when you're ready." Before Rose could respond, Ruth walked over to her luxurious car, opened the trunk, and pulled out a large, neat bundle of cash. She handed it to Rose with a warm smile. "Here, take this for your transport home. You shouldn't have to worry about how to get back." Rose stared at the money in disbelief. She had never seen or even imagined handling this much cash before. Her fingers trembled as she accepted it, too stunned to say much at first. "Thank you, Ruth," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "I really don't know what to say." Ruth gave her a reassuring smile. "No need to thank me, Rose. You're going to make it. I believe in you." Rose clutched the money tightly, feeling a mix of emotions: gratitude, disbelief, and a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change for her. They hugged, and with that, they parted ways. 2 days later, Ruth received a call from Rose. Ruth then invited her to her mansion. Ruth's tone was friendly but insistent. "Come over, let's see what we can do for you." When Rose arrived at the address Ruth had given her, she was taken aback. The mansion was nothing short of breathtaking: towering gates, a long, pristine driveway, and a sprawling garden with manicured lawns and statues. Rose stood at the entrance, speechless for a moment, before making her way inside. The interior was just as extravagant, with high ceilings, chandeliers, and elegant furniture that looked like something out of a dream. Rose had never seen anything like it. Her heart raced as she wondered if this was the same Ruth who had once sat beside her in humble classrooms. Ruth greeted her warmly at the door, her smile radiant as ever. "Come on in, Rose. Let me show you around." As Ruth led Rose through the opulent rooms, Rose's mind swirled with disbelief. "Ruth, this is incredible. I can't believe it. I mean, you were just like me, from a poor family. How did this happen? How did you go from there to here?" Rose's voice was full of awe. Ruth paused and turned to face her, a knowing glint in her eyes. "It wasn't easy, Rose, but like I said, it's not just about what you know, it's about what you're willing to do." Rose looked at Ruth expectantly. "Please, Ruth, I need to know. I'm willing to do anything to get to this level of success. Just tell me how you did it." Ruth chuckled softly, her expression turning serious. "I've always believed in taking bold steps. But what I'm about to tell you stays between us, okay?" Rose nodded, her heart pounding. "I promise, I won't tell anyone." Ruth studied her for a moment, making sure she saw the sincerity in Rose's eyes. Then she leaned closer and spoke in a hushed tone. "I belong to a group called the Widows Club." Rose's eyebrows shot up in confusion. "Widows Club? I don't understand." Ruth smiled knowingly. "It's a society of powerful, influential, and very wealthy women. Widows. Women who have lost their husbands but are far from weak. We come together and share resources, knowledge, and opportunities. We support each other in ways that the outside world wouldn't understand. It's not just about wealth, it's about power, influence, and the ability to make things happen. Rose's mind raced as she tried to process what Ruth had just said. But what does this have to do with you? Ruth's smile faded slightly, but her eyes remained firm. After I graduated and struggled for a while, I was introduced to this club. A mentor in the group saw my potential and helped me get started. Ruth's voice dropped lower, almost as if she were sharing a secret. She introduced me to a very rich old chief and gave me something to sprinkle in his food to make him love and marry me. It worked. I gained control over him, and with that, I made him write my name as his sole successor to everything he had. Once that was done, I found a way to get rid of him. And just like that, I inherited everything you see around you. Rose's mouth hung open as the words sank in. Her heart began to race, and her mind struggled to process what Ruth had just revealed. The idea of using someone's life for wealth was beyond her understanding. "But that's a crime, Ruth," Rose said, her voice trembling. "You can't just do that." Ruth's eyes hardened for a moment, and she leaned forward slightly. "So are the men asking to sleep with you before they can give you a job, Rose? What do you think they're doing when they use their position to manipulate you into doing things you don't want to do? The world isn't as simple as you want to believe. People in power don't always play by the rules, and neither should you if you want to survive in it." Rose's breath caught in her throat. "That's not the same thing, Ruth. What they do is wrong, but you took it a step further. You manipulated someone, and you—" Rose trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The thought of taking someone's life for personal gain was too much for her to grasp. Ruth sat back, her expression becoming more contemplative. "I understand why you're shocked, Rose. It sounds awful, even to me sometimes. But the truth is, I had a choice. I could either keep struggling in poverty, waiting for some fairy tale opportunity to knock on my door, or I could take control of my life. I chose to do whatever it took to get ahead. And believe me, it wasn't easy. I had to become someone I never thought I would be. Someone willing to make the tough choices. It wasn't about being evil, it was about surviving." Rose felt sick to her stomach. "But Tice, why couldn't you just earn it, Ruth? Why couldn't you just find a way to succeed on your own?" Ruth's eyes softened as she studied Rose. "I tried, Rose. Believe me, I tried. But life doesn't care about your hard work or your good intentions. Life will give you opportunities, but it won't always give you the ones that lead to real success. If you want to reach the top, you need to play the game, and the game isn't always fair. It's not always about doing the right thing, it's about doing what gets you ahead. The moment you stop being afraid of making difficult choices, that's when things change." Rose could feel her head spinning. She thought about everything she had worked for, all the years she had spent staying focused, keeping her integrity intact. She had promised herself she would break the curse of poverty in her family through hard work. But now she was hearing Ruth's story, one of manipulation, betrayal, and choices that went against everything she had ever believed. "But Ruth," Rose said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what about the family members of these men? Don't they fight back, knowing something is fishy?" Ruth's expression didn't waver. She leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. "That's where the Widows' Club comes in," she replied smoothly. "The group is made up of powerful women, wives of late presidents, ministers, judges, and some of the most influential men you can think of. They protect each other. When someone questions or tries to fight back, the club pulls strings behind the scenes. Court cases disappear, evidence gets buried. The system bends to favor us. You'd be surprised how much influence we really have." Rose's heart pounded harder. The thought of crossing such powerful people sent chills down her spine. "So there's no way out once you're in?" she asked cautiously. Ruth smiled faintly. "Let's just say no one ever wants to leave." Rose sat in silence, her mind reeling. She didn't know what scared her more, the level of power Ruth described or the calm, calculated way she spoke about it. "I need time," Rose finally said, her voice shaky. "I need to process all of this, Ruth. It's a lot." Ruth nodded, as if she had expected that response. "Take your time, Rose. But remember, the world doesn't wait. And when the time comes, you'll realize that sometimes survival means making choices you never thought you'd make. For weeks after that conversation, Rose threw herself back into job hunting. She avoided Ruth's calls and messages, determined to find another way. But the corporate world was unkind. Each interview seemed to end with subtle innuendos or blatant requests. "You're very qualified, Miss Rose," one manager said, his eyes lingering where they shouldn't. "But I think you know how this works." Rose walked out of the office that day, tears burning behind her eyes. Weeks turned into months. Her savings dwindled, and soon her father's health began to deteriorate. What started as mild symptoms grew into a life-threatening condition. The hospital bills piled up, and doctors refused further treatment without payment. One evening, as Rose sat by her father's bedside, his breathing shallow, her mother's eyes filled with helpless tears. "Rose, we need to do something. Your father..." Her mother's voice cracked. "He doesn't have much time left." Rose felt the weight of the world crash down on her shoulders. She left the hospital that night and walked aimlessly through the city, eventually stopping outside Ruth's mansion. Her hand trembled as she rang the doorbell. Ruth opened the door, her expression calm but knowing. "Rose," she said, her eyes scanning Rose's exhausted face. "I was wondering when you'd come." Rose swallowed hard, her pride crumbling. "I need help, Ruth. My father, he's dying. The hospital won't treat him without money. Please, I'll pay you back. Just help me." Ruth's gaze softened slightly, but her response was cold. "I could help you, Rose, but that's not how this works." Rose's eyes filled with desperation. "Ruth, please, I'll do anything." Ruth's eyebrow arched. "Anything?" Rose froze, the full weight of Ruth's words settling over her. Ruth stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. "Join the club, Rose. Say yes, and not only will your father's hospital bills vanish, but you'll never have to worry about money again. You'll have power, influence, and control over your own life. But you have to choose. There's no half measure here." Tears streamed down Rose's face as she thought of her father lying in that hospital bed. "Fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll do it." Ruth smiled softly, almost like a proud mentor. "Good. You won't regret this, Rose." She placed a hand on Rose's shoulder. "I'll pick you up at 12 midnight for the initiation ceremony. After that, you'll never be broke a day in your life ever again." Rose nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear and anticipation. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, but there was no turning back now. She had made her choice, desperate to save her father and desperate for a life she had only dreamed of. At precisely midnight, Ruth arrived at Rose's apartment in a sleek black car. Rose hesitated for only a moment before she climbed in, her heart racing. Ruth didn't say much during the drive, but her silence was heavy with unspoken understanding. They drove through the quiet streets, the city dark and still, until they reached a well-known beach. The streetlights flickered as Ruth stopped the car, her eyes glinting in the dark. "Are you ready?" Ruth asked, her voice steady. Rose nodded, though a lump formed in her throat. Ruth held her hands, and before Rose could even comprehend what was happening, they vanished. In the blink of an eye, they were no longer in the car or on the streets. They stood in the middle of a large ocean with an unbreathable pocket, charged with an energy Rose couldn't understand. Around them, women dressed in long, flowing black garments stood in a circle. Their faces were obscured by veils, but there was a palpable aura of power emanating from them. Rose's eyes widened as she scanned the group, realizing some of the women were familiar. Faces from high society, women she had seen in the newspapers, at gala events, and on the covers of magazines. One of the women caught her gaze, and Rose's stomach flipped. If these women could be here, involved in something like this, then maybe it wasn't as bad as she had imagined. Maybe this was just another path to success, one she had to take. Ruth whispered to Rose, her voice soft but firm, "Do not be afraid. You are here because you have proven yourself worthy." A woman, standing slightly ahead of the others, stepped forward. She was older, her face lined with years of power and experience. She gazed at Rose for a long moment, then nodded. "You have come to seek power," the woman said, her voice commanding. "But with power comes responsibility. You must never speak of what you see here, never betray the sisterhood. If you do, the consequences will be dire." The women in the circle muttered in agreement, their voices low and unified. Rose's heart raced as she was handed a small black book with gold lettering. The woman continued, her tone solemn. "This is your oath. Recite it and you will be one of us." With trembling hands, Rose opened the book and read the words aloud. As she did, an intense heat spread through her body, filling her with a strange, unexplainable power. "I vow to never speak of the Widows' Club, to protect our secrets and uphold the values of this sisterhood. I will use my strength to achieve greatness and honor those who have come before me. I accept the responsibilities and the privileges of being one of the chosen." As Rose finished the oath, the women in the circle stepped forward, and a deep silence fell over the gathering. Ruth stepped behind her, guiding her hands as the women placed their hands over Rose's head, marking her initiation into their world. In that moment, Rose felt something shift inside her, a sudden clarity. She was no longer the woman who had struggled to make ends meet. She was part of something much larger, something more dangerous and powerful than she had ever imagined. The ritual ended, and the women slowly dispersed, leaving Rose and Ruth standing alone in the ocean pocket. Ruth placed her arm around Rose's shoulders. "It's done," Ruth said quietly. "You are one of us now. You'll never have to worry about money again. Your father's bills will be covered and more. I've already arranged everything for you." Rose couldn't speak. The magnitude of what had just happened was still sinking in, but a part of her was also relieved. Her father's hospital bills were paid, and the dream of a better life was no longer an unreachable fantasy. The Widows' Club was more powerful than Rose had imagined. They didn't operate in the shadows, at least not entirely. These women attended only the most exclusive high-class events, rubbing shoulders with society's elite. Their presence commanded respect, and even the wives of living, powerful men often whispered longingly about joining them. It was more than just a club. It was a league of untouchable women who shaped industries, influenced political decisions, and maneuvered the world like a chessboard. At first, Rose felt out of place, but Ruth guided her carefully. "Confidence is key," Ruth whispered during one gala where Rose wore an emerald gown that cost more than her entire life's worth. "Look them in the eye. You belong here now. They need to know it." Rose met celebrities, governors, and business tycoons, and slowly her nerves faded. The wealth and power around her became familiar, and with time she found herself blending seamlessly into this new world. One evening, during a private fundraiser at an exclusive hotel, Ruth introduced Rose to Chief Ocon, an 80-year-old oil tycoon with vast estates and businesses across the country. His wife had passed years ago, and he had no direct children, just distant relatives circling like vultures. As Ruth led Rose to his table, she whispered, "He's old but influential. Follow the plan and soon you'll have everything you desire." Chief Ocon's eyes lingered on Rose the moment they met. "You're a rare beauty," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "It's been a long time since I've seen someone like you." Rose smiled, remembering Ruth's instructions. "I'm honored, Chief," she replied softly, placing her hand lightly over his. "I've heard so much about you." Like magic, everything unfolded exactly as Ruth said it would. Within 2 weeks, the chief was utterly smitten. Rose followed every detail of the rituals Ruth had given her, small powders to sprinkle in his tea, subtle charms whispered at midnight. The proposal came swiftly. "I know I'm much older than you," Chief Ocon had said one evening after a lavish dinner, "but I'd like you to be my wife. I want to spend my last years with someone like you by my side." Rose accepted without hesitation. The wedding was grand and extravagant, attended by influential figures from all walks of life. Ruth stood beside Rose, smiling approvingly as the vows were exchanged. "Remember," Ruth whispered during the reception, "the goal is simple. Once he makes you the sole heir, the rest will take care of itself." A month after the wedding, Chief Ocon changed his will. His estates, businesses, and fortune were now Rose's. 2 weeks later, Chief Ocon died of a sudden heart attack, or at least that's what the doctors declared. Rose sat at his funeral in all black, tears streaming down her face for the world to see. But beneath the veil, her eyes were dry and calculating. The Widows' Club had prepared her for this moment, and she played the grieving widow perfectly. They stormed the burial in style, wearing all black and sprayed so much money, people just stood by and watched the display of wealth and opulence. When the inheritance was officially transferred to her, Rose found herself the owner of multiple properties, a fleet of luxury cars, and controlling shares in major oil companies. She had attained a level she had never imagined in her entire life, and now she felt on top of the world. Her father's health had improved dramatically with the money she had provided, and her family members, who once looked at her with a mixture of pity and hope, now regarded her with admiration. Rose was not just wealthy, she was powerful. No longer the girl who fought to stay afloat, she had become a queen in her own right, commanding respect wherever she went. 2 years passed in this newfound world of luxury, and Rose felt more at peace than ever before. Her confidence soared as she moved in higher circles, attending events with foreign dignitaries, CEOs, and philanthropists. But it was not until she met Andrew that things began to change again. Andrew was a striking figure, tall, confident, with the charm of a man who had seen the world. He was a commercial pilot, often flying to international destinations. From their first meeting, they shared an undeniable connection. His laugh was contagious, and his eyes sparkled with genuine warmth every time they spoke. Rose, for the first time in years, felt completely vulnerable with someone. She respected him not just for his looks or career, but for his kindness, intellect, and the way he made her feel. They began spending more and more time together, their bond deepening with each passing day. And then, on one moonlit evening on the balcony of one of her many estates, Andrew knelt before Rose, holding out a beautiful diamond ring. "Rose," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Rose's eyes as she gazed at him, overwhelmed by the beauty of the moment. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, Andrew, I will." She was truly happy. She had everything she could possibly want, wealth, power, and now the man she loved. But that happiness was short-lived. The very next day, Ruth and a few of the Widows' Club members summoned Rose to a private meeting. As she entered the room, she could sense the tension in the air. Ruth sat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. The other women were silent, their eyes trained on Rose. Ruth spoke first, her tone cold and serious. Rose, still beaming with excitement about her engagement, took a seat. "What's going on?" Ruth's voice hardened. "We've heard about your engagement to Andrew." She paused, glancing at the others around the table before meeting Rose's eyes again. Rose's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "I love him, and we're going to get married." "What's wrong with that?" The room grew heavy with silence. One of the older women, a former diplomat's wife, spoke up. "Rose, the Widows' Club was never meant for love. It's for widows, only widows. You cannot marry for love. If you choose to marry, your husband must die. That is how the power flows." Rose's heart stopped. She couldn't breathe for a moment as the words sank in. "What? What are you saying?" Ruth's gaze was unflinching, and her words were firm. "It's the law of the club, Rose. We made you a widow so you could rise to the power you have now. But if you marry for love, you will forfeit everything we've built, and you cannot marry unless he is dead." Rose stood up, her hands trembling. "You never told me this, Ruth. You never told me that my happiness had a price. I can't believe this." "You knew the risks when you joined us," Ruth replied, her voice softer now but still firm. Tears welled up in Rose's eyes as the weight of the situation crashed over her. She felt betrayed, her world shattering around her. She had dreamed of building a life with Andrew, of having children, of being a family. And now she was being told that she had to choose between that life and the power she had gained. Power that had come at such a steep price. "Ruth, I didn't join you to be a pawn in a game of death," Rose said, her voice breaking. "I wanted a better life, but not at the cost of my happiness." Ruth stood up then, walking over to Rose. "I understand this is difficult for you, but this is how it has always been. The Widows' Club gives you everything you've ever wanted, but there is always a price. This is the price you have to pay." Rose knew deep down that she couldn't live without Andrew. The thought of losing him, of living a life where she had everything but love, felt suffocating. She could not let go of him, no matter the cost. So, despite the warnings, she made a bold decision. She planned a secret wedding, one that would not be marked by the watchful eyes of the Widows' Club. There would be no grand ceremony, no luxury-filled event. Just her, Andrew, and the love they shared. But little did she know, the shadows of her past would not let her go so easily. The day of the wedding, Rose's heart was full of hope, her mind set on a future she had always dreamed of. The ceremony was beautiful, simple, intimate, and perfect. But as soon as she and Andrew exchanged vows and were about to celebrate their new life, chaos erupted. Without warning, a group of women stormed into the venue, dressed head to toe in black. The crowd gasped in surprise, unsure of what was happening. Rose's stomach dropped. The Widows' Club had found her. They didn't speak a word to her. They didn't need to. The message was clear. They threw bundles of cash into the air, just as they always did, a reminder of their wealth and power. The sound of the money hitting the floor echoed in Rose's ears, a chilling reminder of what she had left behind. Then, without a word, they left. Rose stood frozen, her mind racing. She tried to mask her panic, knowing she couldn't let Andrew see her worry. But inside, her thoughts were spinning. This was just the beginning. After the wedding, she tried to distance herself from the Widows' Club. She stopped attending their meetings and even relocated to a new house, hoping to leave her past behind. But the peace she had hoped for didn't last. One evening, as she was settling into her new home with Andrew, the doorbell rang. She hesitated before answering it. When she opened the door, she was greeted by familiar faces, the same women from the Widows' Club. "Rose," Ruth's voice was cold, "you cannot escape us. If you want to live, you know what you have to do." Rose's heart raced. "I don't want this. I want to live my life. I'm done with the club." One of the women stepped forward, her eyes cold and unblinking. "You think you can just walk away? You've made a deal, Rose. Either you kill your husband or we will kill both of you." Rose shook her head in disbelief. She could feel the walls closing in on her. "I will never do that," she said, her voice firm, but her heart was heavy with fear. Despite their threats, Rose refused to back down. She stopped seeing the Widows' Club and refused to play their deadly game. But as time passed, the pressure grew. Eventually, she couldn't keep the truth from Andrew any longer. One night, as they sat together in their new home, Rose told him everything. The Widows' Club, the power, the price, and the sacrifices she had made. Andrew sat in stunned silence, his face pale as the weight of her words sank in. He shook his head slowly. "Rose, I had no idea. I love you, but this is too much." Tears welled in Rose's eyes as she reached for him. "Please, Andrew, I never wanted any of this. I just wanted us to have a life together, a family." But Andrew stood up, pacing the room. "I can't stay, Rose. I don't want to be a part of this life, not after what you've told me. I'm sorry, but I have to go." Rose's heart shattered as she watched him pack his things. "Please don't leave me," she begged. "I'm pregnant, Andrew. I'm having your baby." The words stopped Andrew in his tracks. He turned to face her, his expression filled with shock and confusion. You're pregnant?" "Yes," Rose whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to tell you this way, but I couldn't keep it from you anymore. Please don't leave me." Andrew looked at her, torn between his love for her and the horror of her past. "This is all too much, Rose. I need to think." After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice softer. "I'll protect you. We'll leave. I'll move us to another country, somewhere far from here, where they can't find us. We'll start over. For you. For the baby." Rose felt a glimmer of hope rise within her, and she threw herself into his arms. "You mean it?" "I do," Andrew said, his voice steady. "But this war, Rose, it's far from over, and we can't outrun them forever." The couple began making plans to leave the country, to disappear from the dangerous world they were caught in. But as they packed their bags, Rose could feel the shadow of the Widows' Club looming over them, a constant reminder that no matter how far they ran, the past would always be a part of their future. What they didn't know was that the Widows' Club wouldn't let Rose go so easily. The game was far from over.